Elliot set the envelope on the seat beside me during intermission at Sophia's spring recital. He leaned close and said, "Sign these tonight. The prenup covers everything anyway." Sophia was backstage, preparing for the second act. I set the envelope in my bag without opening it. I watched my daughter play through the second half, and I drove home with Sophia asleep in the back seat. I opened the envelope in the parking garage, under the yellow overhead light, the engine still running. I read the cover page. Then I went inside, walked upstairs to the bedroom closet, and took the prenuptial agreement out of the fire-safe box where I had kept it for 14 years. I opened it to page 14. The sticky note I had placed there 3 years into the marriage was still there. The clause was still there. Elliot had signed it 14 years ago, and he had never once come back to read it. The estate total, once the prenup was voided, was $8.4 million. Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. People always say that a prenuptial agreement is about protection. What they usually mean is that it is about one person's protection, the one who arrives at the signing with assets and a desire to lock them away. What they forget, consistently and at some cost, is that every contract has two sides. And the side that does the reading is not always the side that does the signing. Have you ever heard someone describe a prenuptial agreement the way they describe an insurance policy? Necessary and unpleasant, something you file away and hope you never need? That is a reasonable instinct if you find documents tedious. I was never that person. I had spent years in contract work before I became a wife and a mother. In contract work, there is a rule so basic it barely qualifies as wisdom. You are bound by what you sign, not by what you thought you understood when you signed it. I had read page 14 on the morning we signed the prenuptial agreement. I had placed a sticky note on it that same afternoon, not because I suspected anything, not because I was building toward anything, but because I was the kind of person who marks the page she might someday need to find in the dark. He had reviewed it for 40 minutes. I was in the waiting room. I know this because I checked the time when they went in, and I checked it again when they came out. The city was Nashville, and the season was spring, and the redbuds had just finished their bloom along the Belle Meade streets, that particular shade of deep pink that lasts about 10 days and then goes all at once, the way certain things go. Elliot and I had lived in the Belle Meade house for 9 years by the time this story ends. Before that, we had rented a smaller place in Green Hills while the renovations were underway. Before that, we had been a couple who met at a commercial real estate law firm downtown, where he was the client and I was the paralegal assigned to his file. He was 48 when the recital happened. I was 42. We had been married for 14 years, and I had been at home, managing our household and our daughter's life, for 11 of them. I want you to understand what 11 years of that kind of work looks like, because it is not the invisible nothing that the position letter would later imply. I had been a contracts paralegal, commercial real estate, primarily. It is a discipline that rewards people who can hold dense, specific language in their heads simultaneously. People who notice when one clause contradicts another 3 pages earlier. I was good at it. I was the kind of paralegal that attorneys asked for by name when they had a complicated file. Because I did not miss things, and I did not rush, and I did not assume that a clause I had seen in 100 similar documents necessarily meant the same thing in this one. When Sophia was born, and Elliot and I decided together that I would leave the firm and manage our household full-time, I applied that same set of habits to the new context. I did not suddenly become a different kind of person simply because the document at hand was a school enrollment form instead of a commercial lease. I read it, I noted the terms, I filed it in the correct place. Our household ran with the precision of a small office. Not because I was anxious, I want to be clear about that, but because precision was the only mode I had ever fully trusted. I was the volunteer treasurer for Sophia's school PTA for 3 years, a position that involved managing a budget of approximately $47,000 per year across a school year calendar, with 42 separate line items. I audited the accounts quarterly. I reconciled every expenditure against the approved budget to within $1. The parents on the committee found this either reassuring or exhausting, depending on their temperament. Elliot found it, toward the end, mostly invisible. Sophia was 12 that spring. She had been playing the violin since she was 6, and she was genuinely good, not prodigy good, but the kind of good that makes a parent go still in their seat when the bow meets the string and the room quiets. She had a spring recital every year at the school's concert hall, a mid-size auditorium with blue velvet seats, and the particular smell of folded-down upholstered chairs and other people's coffee, and the faint tang of rosin from the orchestra room next door. I had sat in that auditorium 8 times for Sophia's performances. I had always saved the aisle seat for Elliot. He had always arrived late. The fire-safe box sat on the top shelf of our bedroom closet. It had been there since the year we moved into the Belmead house, and it held, in addition to the prenuptial agreement, our passports, Sophia's birth certificate, and a collection of documents I had assembled over the years with my customary orderliness. The prenuptial agreement was a bound document, 14 pages, cream-colored cover, Elliot's attorney's firm name embossed at the bottom. I had read it 4 times since the day we signed it. The most recent reading had been 6 months ago, in October, when something in the quality of Elliot's attention had shifted in a way I did not yet have words for. I had not told him I had reread it. He had not asked. The sticky note on page 14 was a small yellow square. I had placed it there 3 years into the marriage, the second time I read the document, when I had understood with more precision than I had at signing what the clause on that page actually meant in practice. I had pressed it flat to the page and smoothed the edge down carefully with my thumb, the way you press a bookmark into a place you will want to find again. I put the agreement back in the box and went downstairs to start dinner. That was 9 years ago. Elliot had never opened that box, to my knowledge. It was, like the school records and the household spreadsheets, in my department. I should tell you about the 2 things I noticed before the recital, because they are worth understanding precisely. The first came in February. Elliot had always been at ease with his laptop in my presence, left it open on the kitchen table, open on the coffee table, the screen visible when I passed through a room. At some point in the second week of February, that changed. He began closing the screen when I entered. Not quickly, not guiltily. He was too practiced at confidence for that. He closed it the way a man closes a private notebook, deliberately, ordinarily, as though it had been his habit all along. I noticed because I noticed changes in pattern. I had spent years in contract work, and contract work is nothing but pattern recognition, the detection of the word that does not belong in the clause, the comma in the wrong place, the paragraph that doesn't quite align with the one before it, That habit does not leave you simply because you stop billing for it. I noticed the closed laptop and I did not say anything. I began paying a more deliberate kind of attention. The second thing came in March. I accessed our shared family calendar account to update the logistics around Sophia's recital schedule. A shared account we had set up years ago for exactly this kind of coordination, and I found a recurring appointment I had not created. It was labeled Site Review, Dana S. It appeared every other week. The location attached as a map link resolved to an address in Germantown I recognized as a hotel. The appointment had been created 6 months earlier, which placed its origin in September of the previous year. It had last been edited from Elliot's device. He had not mentioned it to me. He had not mentioned a Dana S. either, in any context I could recall. I updated Sophia's recital entry. I closed the calendar. I did not delete the appointments or take screenshots yet. I simply noted them, the way you note a discrepancy in a contract when you are still reading, before you have reached the clause that explains it. Have you ever noticed something small and felt the air in the room change quality, even before you could name what you had seen? Have you ever watched a familiar person move through a familiar room and felt, without being able to say why, that something was no longer the same? That is what those 2 months were like. February and March. The redbuds not yet bloomed. The house running exactly as it always had. Sophia practicing her second movement passage in the afternoons with the particular focused irritation of a 12-year-old who almost has it. Elliot coming home to dinner at the usual time, asking the usual questions about Sophia's day, carrying himself with the ease of a man who believed his arrangements were invisible. I watched. I took note. I kept my own counsel, and I waited for the thing I was already beginning to see the shape of. The recital was on a Thursday evening in the last week of April. The redbuds had gone by then. The color passed, and the green beginning in its place. The long Nashville spring settling into itself. I had dressed carefully. A dark blue dress, low heels, my hair down. I told Sophia that morning that she was going to be extraordinary. She told me, with the extremely serious face of a 12-year-old musician, that she was going to be adequate, the highest assessment she ever granted herself before a performance. She wore a black dress with a white collar and her violin was in its case, and I drove her to the school an hour early for the pre-show ensemble warm-up. I had saved the front row seat on the aisle for Elliot, the way I always did. He arrived 4 minutes into the first piece. I know it was 4 minutes, because I had been watching the door. And he settled in beside me with the quiet authority of a man who did not feel that lateness required acknowledgement. The first half of the program was the younger students, Sophia's group in the middle, and she played well. I watched her and felt the particular private pride of knowing your child is doing the thing they have worked toward, and that you are the only person in the room who knows exactly how many hours that took. At intermission, the house lights came up to about half, and the parents around us began to stand and file toward the lobby. Some went for coffee, some headed backstage to find their children. I stayed in my seat. I wanted to be there when Sophia returned for the second act. Elliot stayed beside me, which was unusual. He typically moved through any gathering, worked the room, found someone to speak to. That evening he stayed. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He set the manila envelope on the seat between us. He leaned slightly toward me. His voice was low. "Sign these tonight," he said. "The prenup covers everything anyway." Sophia was backstage. She was changing into the blue dress she wore for the second half of the program, and she did not know that her father had just placed a divorce petition on the seat beside her mother's right hand. The auditorium smelled of coffee and rosin, and the dry warmth of a room full of people. The lights were half up. Someone 2 rows ahead was photographing their program. I picked up the envelope and put it in my bag. I did not open it. I looked at the stage. I waited for the lights to go back down. He looked straight ahead and said nothing more. I said nothing at all. I did not look at him for the remainder of the recital. When the lights dimmed and the second half began, Sophia came back out with the rest of the string section, and I watched her the whole time. When she took her bow at the end, I stood and I clapped. I thought about page 14, the sticky note I had pressed there 9 years ago. I thought about it the way you think about a thing you have been careful with, a thing stored well, a thing that is exactly where you left it. I found Sophia backstage, and she asked how she had done, and I told her she had been extraordinary. She said she had stumbled slightly in the second movement, but the bow recovery had been clean. I said it was invisible from the front. She allowed herself one small, private smile. We walked to the car in the mild April evening, and she fell asleep before we had left the parking lot. I sat in the parking garage for a while after her breathing steadied. The yellow overhead light flickered once and held. I opened my bag and took out the envelope. It was sealed with a metal clasp, not glued. He had not needed to seal it completely, because this was a formality he believed was already resolved. I opened it. I read the cover page. The divorce petition named irreconcilable differences. His attorney's attached letter set out the anticipated terms. The prenuptial agreement controlled. The marital estate was limited to the joint savings account and my personal vehicle, and my total share was approximately $180,000. I put the petition back in the envelope. I drove home. Sophia slept in the back seat all the way to Belle Mead, the violin case upright in the footwell beside her. And when we got home, I carried her inside, and she woke just enough to walk to her room. I sat on the edge of her bed for a moment in the dark, listening to her breathing slow again. Then I went to the bedroom closet. I opened the fire-safe box. I took out the prenuptial agreement. I opened it to page 14, where the yellow sticky note was still pressed flat, exactly as I had left it. I read the clause. I read it once more. I closed the document. I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a few minutes, and then I went to bed. The formal position letter arrived the following week, delivered by email to my personal account, and I assume intended to feel decisive. I read it at the kitchen table where I had sat for 11 years running the logistics of our life. The school calendar, the household accounts, the TA treasury, every administrative thread of a household that functioned because someone had made it function. His attorney's opening position was a document of confident simplicity. The prenuptial agreement controlled the outcome. Elliot's real estate portfolio, 4 properties, developed or acquired during the marriage. Valued by his own preliminary appraisal at approximately $6.3 million, was designated separate property under the agreement's terms. The joint savings, approximately $180,000, was to be divided equally between us. My personal vehicle was already in my name. Total settlement, approximately $180,000, for 14 years of a marriage and 11 of those years devoted entirely to the management of our shared life. Do you know what $180,000 looks like against 11 years of full-time domestic work? Do you know what it looks like to have someone assign a number to your years? I calculated it. 11 years is approximately 4,000 weeks. $180,000 divided by 4,000 is $45 per week. That was the value Elliot's attorney had placed on my contribution to the life we had built together. On the household I had managed with the same procedural discipline I had once applied to commercial real estate contracts. I read the letter twice. I folded it back into its envelope. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter. Then I picked up my phone and called Beatriz Escobar. I had found Beatrice's name through the wife of a former colleague, a woman named Colleen, who had navigated a complex dissolution 3 years earlier, and described Beatrice to me over lunch as the kind of attorney who reads everything. That description was sufficient. I had kept Beatrice's number in my phone for 2 years without occasion to use it. I was the kind of person who kept such things. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building on Church Street. Warm, orderly, a wall of family law case binders along one side, a small wooden conference table by a window that caught afternoon light from the west. She was 50, with reading glasses she pushed up to her forehead when she was thinking, and brought back down to her nose when she was reading. She was the kind of woman who does not perform confidence because she does not need to. She met me without ceremony, offered water, and sat across the table. I had brought the prenuptial agreement. I placed it in front of her. She opened it from the beginning and read through at the measured pace of someone who has processed many such documents, pausing sometimes, turning back a page, moving forward again without hurry. When she reached page 14, she stopped. She saw the sticky note. She did not speak for a moment. She read the page. She read it a second time. Then she looked up at me over the rims of her glasses. Did he know this was here? I am fairly certain, I said, that he did not. She looked back at the page. She set both palms flat on the table on either side of the document, very still. Then, this is clean and exercisable. She explained what I already understood but needed confirmed by a second voice, the kind of confirmation that allows you to carry something forward without second-guessing yourself. The clause was a standard infidelity provision. It had appeared in prenuptial agreements drafted from certain template forms and was sometimes flagged to clients as significant, and sometimes simply included as part of the standard package without particular emphasis. Elliot's attorney had included it. Elliot had signed the document. The clause provided that the prenuptial agreement was voidable at the election of the non-cheating spouse upon documented evidence of marital infidelity, with the election filed within 60 days of the divorce petition. If the election was exercised within that window and the documentation met the evidentiary standard, the prenuptial agreement became void ab initio, as though it had never existed. Under Tennessee equitable distribution law, the entire marital estate would then be subject to division according to the court's assessment of each spouse's contributions, the length of the marriage, and a full range of factors that did not begin from the premise, as Elliot's attorney's position began, that my fair share was $180,000. Have you ever been in a room when the exact dimensions of something became clear all at once, not partially, not approximately, but completely? That is what Beatrice's office felt like that afternoon, not triumphant. Clear, the word is clear. Do you know the difference between those two feelings? I told her about the calendar entries. The hotel in Germantown. The appointment labeled Site Review, Dana S. appearing every other week, created in September and running forward 6 months from there, the most recent instance 3 weeks before the recital. She asked me to walk her through how I had accessed the calendar, and I did so precisely, so she could assess the evidentiary status of what I had found. She asked whether there was anything further. I told her about Mira. Mira was a mutual friend, I will call her that, because she asked me to keep her role quiet where possible, and I am the kind of person who honors that. She had seen Elliot and Dana Sherrod together at a charity event in January at a Germantown gallery opening that both of them attended without, apparently, considering that anyone who knew them both might also be there. Mira had told me about it in February over coffee, with the careful delicacy of someone who is not certain what she is saying and is entirely certain she must say it. I had thanked her. I had noted it. I had waited. Beatriz asked for a written statement from Mira, as precise as she could manage: dates, the venue, what she had observed. She told me to print the calendar entries and any associated metadata. She told me to pull any financial records I had access to that showed accounts I had not known about, if such records existed. They did. In March, while I was beginning to pay the more deliberate kind of attention, I had looked at the credit statements coming through our household mail and found a statement for an account I had not seen before, a credit card in Elliot's name alone, opened 2 years earlier, for which no statement had previously arrived at the house. The account had hotel charges on it. I printed the statements. I organized them by date, the way I organized everything, because that system was exactly what this moment required. Beatriz filed the election notice 31 days after Elliot's petition. 31 days, well within the 60-day window. The notice was properly executed, supported by the calendar metadata, the hotel receipts from the account Elliot had opened without my knowledge, and Mira's written statement. The prenuptial agreement was voided. The marital estate, the Bell Mead house, the 4 real estate properties, the joint and individual investments accumulated during the marriage, all $8.4 million of it became subject to Tennessee equitable distribution. The phone rang 3 days after the notice was filed. I was in the kitchen. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, not Elliot's cell, not his office line, not any of the 4 or 5 numbers I had for him. He knew I might not answer the ones I recognized. He had tried a number I didn't have. I set the phone face down on the counter and let it go to voicemail. He did not leave one. Elliot's attorney filed a formal response within the week. The argument was that the infidelity clause was unenforceable boilerplate, standard language that had been, in his phrase, inadvertently included in the document without adequate disclosure to his client. It was a bold argument. It was also an argument that depended on the court accepting that an attorney's own drafted clause, in a document his client had signed, could be set aside on the grounds that the attorney had failed to flag it sufficiently. Beatriz's response was brief and documented. She cited Tennessee case law on the enforceability of prenuptial provisions, attached a certified copy of the agreement showing proper execution by both parties and the drafting attorney's own signature, and noted that the inadvertent inclusion argument was difficult to sustain in a clause the drafting attorney had originated. The motion was denied within 10 days. I will admit to you that I had wondered, during those 10 days, whether the argument might succeed. Not because I thought it had merit, but because I have spent enough time with legal documents to know that merit and outcome are not always the same thing, and that confident lawyers with well-resourced clients sometimes find ways through arguments that should not work. But the Tennessee case law was consistent, and the execution was clean, and the judge denied the motion. Beatriz called me when the denial came through. She said simply, as expected. I said thank you. We hung up. Elliot called again, 3 more times over the following 2 weeks, each from a different unfamiliar number, which told me he was running out of numbers to try. I did not answer any of them. I did not block them either, because blocking would have required a decision I had not yet made about what I wanted that silence to mean. I preferred to let them ring and note the calls in the log I had been keeping since the day I found the calendar entries, a simple, dated record of each contact attempt, each filing, each development in the case, kept in a document on my laptop that I backed up every evening. His attorney filed a second motion, arguing that the documentation I had submitted was circumstantial and insufficient to meet the evidentiary standard required to trigger the clause. Beatrice met this motion methodically. She produced the hotel receipts, organized by date and amount from the account statement, 14 separate charges at the same Germantown hotel over a period of 8 months, each one falling within 2 to 3 days of the calendar entries. She attached the calendar metadata, which showed not just the appointment entries but the device ID used to create them, traced to Elliot's personal laptop, the same one he had begun closing when I walked into a room. She attached Mira's written statement, which was 3 pages and precise. The motion was denied. Elliot's team filed a third argument in late June, a motion claiming that the equitable distribution analysis should be stayed pending an emergency valuation hearing, on the grounds that the real estate market had shifted materially since the independent appraisal was commissioned, and the portfolio's value might therefore be substantially different from what the appraiser had found. Beatrice reviewed the motion and called me that evening. She said this is a delay tactic, not a legal argument. The motion cited no case law supporting an emergency re-evaluation hearing at this stage of proceedings. It was denied within a week. Elliot's attorney did not attempt a fourth motion. There was also the matter of Mira. I should tell you more about her, because she deserves more than a mention. Mira had known both Elliot and me for 8 years. She had been in our orbit since Sophia was 4, a friend from the neighborhood whose children were a year behind Sophia at school. She was the person I called when Sophia had a fever, and I needed someone to pick her up. She was the person who had noticed, at the Germantown Gallery opening in January, that Elliot and Dana Sherrod were standing very close together near the back of the room, in the way that people stand when they believe they are not being observed. She had stayed at the event for another 40 minutes and watched them leave together. She had not imagined it. She had not misread it. When I asked Mira for a written statement, in early May she was quiet on the phone for a moment. Then she said, "Of course." She wrote 3 pages. They were precise and accurate, and they described exactly what she had seen without embellishment or inference. The kind of statement you write when you have been asked to be a witness to something and you take that word seriously. She brought it to me in person at the East Nashville rental on a weekday afternoon when Sophia was at school. She sat at my kitchen table and drank tea, and she said, "At the end, I hope this helps you get what you're owed." I told her it would. I told her it already had. There was a period of approximately 3 weeks, in late June and early July, during which the procedural pace slowed while the independent appraiser conducted the real estate portfolio valuation. I was living in the furnished rental in East Nashville by then, a quiet street with a covered porch, a yard with good afternoon light, a kitchen smaller than the one in Belle Meade, but oriented toward a window that let in the morning. I had settled into a rhythm in that rental that was different from the rhythm of the Belle Meade house. Quieter, more deliberate. I cooked for myself and for Sophia when she was with me, which was every other week under the temporary arrangement Beatrice had negotiated. During those weeks, Beatrice and I met twice. The first meeting was to review the appraiser's preliminary methodology and identify any aspects of the portfolio valuation we wanted to raise questions about. The second was to go through the dissipation analysis, which examined the hotel receipts and the separate credit account in the context of the marital estate. The dissipation number, the amount Elliot had spent on the affair from marital resources, came to $140,000 over 2 years. That number mattered to the final calculation. Beatrice explained how it would factor in. I wrote it down in the log and closed my notebook. One afternoon in late June, I returned to the Bell Mead house to collect additional personal items, books, some clothing, the framed photographs from the upstairs hallway that were mine, by origin and history, even if the house itself was not. I had arranged the visit through the attorneys, as required, and Elliot was not there. The house had the specific quietness of a space that is being managed but not lived in fully. The kitchen I had designed was exactly as I had left it. The curtains I had chosen were in place. The built-in bookshelves, which had taken 3 months and 2 rounds of revisions to get exactly right, were still full of the books we had accumulated across 14 years. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter once, the way you touch a thing you are in the process of leaving. Then I collected what I had come for, and I left. What I did not grieve was the house itself. What would you have grieved in my place? What I grieved was something harder to locate, the version of the 14 years that had been genuine, whatever proportion of it that was. The early years in the Green Hills rental before Bell Mead, when Elliot and I would drive out to the property sites on Saturday mornings and he would walk me through what he was building and I asked questions out of genuine interest, and he answered them out of what I still believe was genuine regard for my ability to understand the answers. The Saturday morning when we stood in the mud at a site in Donaldson, and he said he had never had a partner who read the site plans rather than simply nodding at them. I had said, "I'm not a partner, I'm a paralegal." He had said, "Not for long." We had been engaged 4 months later. I remembered the morning we signed the prenuptial agreement with the kind of clarity that attaches itself to mornings when you know something is permanent. It was October, a cool Tuesday. We were married the following March. The signing took place in the offices of Elliot's attorney, a firm on 2nd Avenue with a view of the river. The kind of office that is designed to communicate that you are in the presence of people who handle serious things. Elliot arrived first. He had been in with his attorney for about 40 minutes when the assistant came to the waiting room to let me know they were ready for me. I timed it, because I time things. I checked my watch going in and coming out. The document was 14 pages. Elliot had a copy, and I had a copy, and the attorney had an original. Elliot was relaxed, the ease of a man who knows the deal structure and is simply completing the formality. He signed at the indicated lines. His attorney initialed the pages. I read all 14 before I signed. The attorney asked me, with the practiced courtesy of someone accustomed to parties who do not read what they sign, whether I had had an opportunity to review the document. I said yes. He asked whether I had any questions. I said I did not, which was true, because I had reviewed the document on my own 2 days earlier and had already formed my understanding of every clause. Elliot was already putting on his coat when I asked the assistant for a pen to take home. Not a significant ask. I wanted a pen from the office in case I needed to make any margin notes on my copy in the car. I did not make notes in the car. I read the document again that night at the kitchen table in the Green Hills apartment with a cup of tea. I reached page 14. I read the infidelity clause. I read it the way I read every clause in a contract, as a precise statement of what would happen under a specific set of conditions. I was not suspicious. I was not worried. I was simply being the kind of person I was. The following afternoon, I took a small yellow sticky note and pressed it flat to the page, smoothing the edge with my thumb, the way you mark a place you may need to return to. Then, I put the document in the fire-safe box, which I had bought the previous month in preparation for the move to Belle Meade. That version of him had been real. I believe that. At some point, it had become something else, something that included a separate credit card account and a calendar full of appointments at a Germantown hotel, and I had not been given the information I would have needed to know when the transition happened. That was its own particular kind of loss, and I named it once, to myself. On a Tuesday evening in the East Nashville kitchen with a glass of wine and the porch light on. Then I set it on a shelf in my mind, carefully, and I did not take it back down while I still needed to be clear. The independent appraiser's final report came back in mid-July. Elliot's own preliminary valuation had put the portfolio at $6.3 million. The independent figure came in at $6. $1 million, close, but with a different treatment of one property that had been partially developed using joint funds during the marriage. That distinction affected how the marital period appreciation was calculated, and the marital period appreciation mattered enormously to what equitable distribution would actually produce. 4 years of growth on the portfolio, attributable to the marital period, and therefore subject to distribution, was assessed at $1.8 million. This was the figure that changed everything about what the total looked like. Add the joint investment accounts at $290,000, the equitable share of the marital home's value at $520,000, and the dissipation payment of $140,000. And the number that equitable distribution could reasonably produce was approximately $2.75 million. Against the $180,000 Elliot's attorney had placed in a sealed envelope at a school recital, as though the arithmetic of 14 years was already settled. Beatrice and I talked through the realistic range of outcomes twice during July. She was consistent and direct equitable distribution in Tennessee is not a formula, it is a judicial assessment, and the assessment would take into account the length of the marriage, the contributions of each party, including non-monetary contributions, and the documented marital misconduct. She thought the range was defensible. She thought the high end of the range was achievable if we went to full trial. She also thought a settlement conference might produce a result close enough to the high end that the additional cost and time of trial would not be justified. I told her I trusted her judgment on the tactical question. I told her what number I needed to be able to say yes to. She wrote it down. Sophia knew something was happening in the way children know things they have not been told in words. She was staying with her grandmother in Brentwood every other week, and the weeks she was with me in the East Nashville rental, she was watchful in the way she had been watchful since she was small, quiet observation, precise questions at precise moments, long stretches of apparent absorption in other things that were not quite absorption at all. She asked me once, in early July, whether we were going to be okay. I told her yes. I told her we were going to be entirely okay, and that I needed her to trust me on that specific point, even though I could not explain all of it yet. She looked at me for the kind of moment that only very serious 12-year-olds can sustain. Then she nodded and went back to the passage she had been working on, and I stood in the kitchen doorway, listening to her play it through, and it was very nearly clean. August brought the preliminary settlement discussions, which Beatrice managed through a series of position letters exchanged with Hargrove, Elliot's attorney, a man named Hargrove whom I had met once at a firm dinner 7 years earlier, and who had the smooth, unhurried manner of someone accustomed to getting what he was angling toward through patience and the appearance of reasonableness. The letters went back and forth across 6 weeks. I received copies of each one and read them at my kitchen table in East Nashville in the morning before Sophia was up with coffee. I marked the paragraphs that seemed to me to be arguing past the facts rather than with them. I sent my notes to Beatrice. She used some of them. She had arrived at others independently. Hargrove's third position letter, in late August, made a concession I had not expected. His team acknowledged the election notice was timely filed, and the prenuptial agreement was voided. The argument had shifted to the scope of the distribution. They proposed an alternative methodology for calculating the marital period appreciation, one that would, under their approach, reduce the figure attributable to the marriage, and therefore reduce my share of it to approximately $1.1 million total. It was a significant concession from the original $180,000. It was not, however, close to what equitable distribution required. Beatrice wrote back with our counterposition, documented to the page in the appraiser's report. The exchange of letters continued. The settlement conference was scheduled for the first Tuesday of September. Have you ever walked into a room knowing that the document in your bag was the whole of what the morning required? That is what the first Tuesday of September felt like. The morning of the conference was overcast, the particular gray of a Nashville September that has not yet committed to being autumn. I dressed carefully, a dark jacket, dark trousers, low heels. I arrived 20 minutes early, and Beatrice met me in the lobby and walked me through the room layout, the likely sequence of the morning, and the specific arguments she anticipated Hargrove would lead with, and how she planned to address them. I listened. I had brought the prenuptial agreement. I kept it in my bag. Elliot arrived with Hargrove about 3 minutes before the scheduled start. He did not look at me when he sat down across the table. He arranged his papers with his customary deliberateness, the same quality of focused preparation I had once admired in him at deal tables, the posture of a man who had closed difficult negotiations for 20 years. He believed he was walking into a room where the terms were still to be settled. He did not know what Beatrice was about to take out of her folder. Hargrove opened with a revised offer. Elliot's team had moved significantly from their original position, which told me the legal situation had landed harder on their side than I had been able to fully assess from the outside. The offer attempted to reframe the equitable distribution calculation, a specific methodology for separating the premarital from the marital growth in the portfolio, which, if accepted, would reduce my equitable share to roughly $1.1 million. Beatrice did not respond immediately. She opened her folder. She removed the certified copy of the prenuptial agreement. She turned to page 14. She read the clause aloud. Not quickly, not theatrically, simply read it, at a normal pace, all the way through. The room was quiet. The overcast light came through the west-facing window in the flat, even way that overcast light does. When she finished, she set the document on the table with the page facing Elliot. His attorney looked at Elliot. Elliot looked at the table. He did not look up. That was the moment. Not a dramatic one, by the standards of drama. No raised voice, no named accusation, no confrontation. Just a man sitting across a table, looking at a page he had signed 14 years ago and never revisited, while the clause sat there in the particular permanence of a thing that has always been exactly where it was. The silence stretched. It had the quality of arithmetic being done under pressure, the kind where you keep arriving at the same answer and keep hoping the next calculation will come out differently. His attorney asked for a brief recess. They left. Beatrice and I sat in the flat September light. She refilled her water glass. She did not attempt to fill the silence, and I did not need it filled. I took the prenuptial agreement from where she had left it on the table, and I looked at page 14. The sticky note was still there. Smoothed flat, the edge pressed down with the same thumb that had placed it 9 years ago on an ordinary afternoon. I had not placed it as a preparation. I had placed it because I was the kind of person who marks what she might need to find. They were gone for 22 minutes. When they came back, Hargrove set a revised figure on the table. It was close enough to equitable distribution that accepting it was rational, and refusing it would have produced a longer and more expensive process for a gain that was uncertain. The figure was $2.75 million, my equitable share of the marital home at $520,000, my share of the joint investment accounts at $290,000, a proportional allocation of the portfolio's marital period appreciation at $1, $8 million, and the dissipation payment of $140,000, versus the $180,000 I had been handed in an envelope during intermission at a school recital, as though the arithmetic of my life was a matter already resolved. I looked at the copy of page 14 on the table. I looked at Beatrice. She gave me the small, precise nod of a woman who had assessed the situation completely and was telling me, without words, that this was the answer. I said yes. I accepted the settlement. The transfer completed in 6 weeks. The legal machinery ran as it runs when the documentation is clean and the parties have reached a resolution, orderly, scheduled, without drama. The financial accounts were rebalanced. The property interests were formally recorded in the Davidson County Register. The dissipation payment was transferred in 2 installments, both on schedule. Elliot retained the core of his real estate portfolio and the operational business he had spent 20 years building. He retained, also, the knowledge that a clause his own attorney had drafted and he had never thought to revisit had cost him the protection he had believed was absolute. I do not know what he made of that knowledge. We did not speak. I bought the house in East Nashville, on the street with the covered porch where I had been renting. It is smaller than the Belle Meade house, and it has a kitchen with good light, the kind that comes through south-facing windows in the morning and makes the room feel like a place worth being in. There is a room off the kitchen I am turning into an office. I have a desk in there now and a filing system and a lamp on a timer that comes on at 6 in the morning. Sophia's school records go in the filing cabinet in alphabetical order, the same way they always have. The household accounts go in the same system. The fire-safe box sits on the top shelf of the closet in the new bedroom. It holds the settlement agreement, properly executed and witnessed and dated. Sophia's birth certificate. Our passports. One needs renewal in the spring, and the prenuptial agreement still in its cream-colored binding, page 14 still marked with the yellow sticky note I pressed down carefully 9 years ago on an afternoon in Belle Meade when I was simply being the kind of person I have always been. Do you know what it means to have your own name on a new deed? I do. The recital program is in a drawer in the new kitchen, that Thursday evening in April, Sophia's name listed under the string section. I have not thrown it away. I have not framed it. Some things take their time becoming what they are going to be, and I am patient with those things. Beatriz sent a bottle of champagne the week the transfer completed. I opened it on a Tuesday evening in the new kitchen with my sister, who had driven up from Murfreesboro for the occasion. She said she was proud of me. I told her the credit really belonged to a clause drafted by a man who had not thought to emphasize it, and signed by a man who had not thought to reread it. She laughed. I laughed too, a genuine one, surprised out of me by how fully I meant it. It had been a while since laughter came that clean. Elliot spent 40 minutes in a review session with his attorney on the day we signed that prenuptial agreement. 14 years later, when the agreement was the only thing standing between him and the outcome he had planned, those 40 minutes turned out to be the measure of his preparation. I had read every page on the morning of the signing. I had placed a sticky note on page 14 that same afternoon, not because I was planning anything, not because I had seen any future clearly enough to plan for it, but because I do not sign documents I have not read, and I do not close an agreement without marking the page I might someday need to find. That is not strategy. That is simply the way I have always moved through paperwork and through life. Read it, mark the page, keep the document somewhere you can find it when the time comes. What would you have done, dear listeners, if you had been at that table 14 years ago? If you had read the clause on page 14 and understood what it meant, and then spent 14 years watching your husband believe his protection was absolute, would you have told him? Would you have set the document in front of him one evening and opened it to the page and said, "This is here, and it means what it says"? Or would you have done what I did, which was simply read it, mark it, keep the box on the shelf, and let the document mean what it means in its own time? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them, and I am genuinely curious to know how many of you have ever been the person at the signing table who actually read every page. Share this with someone who has ever been handed a document they were expected to sign without reading. It happens far more often than anyone will admit, and most of the time it is not a prenuptial agreement. Most of the time it is something smaller and quieter, something that sits in a drawer for years before it matters. Read it anyway. Thank you, as always, for listening.